Aine Brazil of Thornton Tomasetti. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, nice to be here.
And congratulations, by the way, on being here for the Con Award.
Well, I am very honored. Big footsteps I'm following in, so I have a lot to live up to.
Well, you've done a lot in your career, and I wonder, looking back, if we could go through some of it. What do you think's been the most challenging project you've worked on, and why?
It's interesting because I think probably the most challenging one is the one that is still ongoing right now. 30 Hudson Yards, which is it's about 1,300 feet, but it's where it's located and the complexity of the site and all of the things that need to go in to make that building actually function and work structurally, quite a challenge. So I think I'd probably put that pretty close to the top of the list.
Dig into that a little more. What are some of the structural challenges exactly?
Well, it sits over the Long Island Rail Yards in New York City on the west side. And because of the fact that the tracks are all coming together into a tunnel, there are really very, very few places where you could actually get any foundations or get columns down. So we have columns that slope and slink around and move everywhere in the building. And that's okay in a smaller building, but it tends to soften the building in terms of its performance structurally. And when it gets softer, that means it's a little bit more tricky, a little bit more challenging to get the lateral system to work efficiently. So a lot of things happened on that building. Some of the columns from the tower actually transfer over 150-foot trusses on the bottom. So that's kind of like a mattress. It's a little bit soft.
That site also has so much else going on. I mean, if you expand out a little bit to Hudson Yards more generally, there's several other huge projects under development there.
Right.
The new subway station. Does that all factor into
what you have to do? Well, the subway station is across the street, far enough away that it doesn't influence the design, although there is a connection planned under the street. But right now, it's far enough away that it doesn't actually affect the design. So many other buildings in New York City have been right up against old subway lines and that kind of thing. So this is not that much of an issue there. But there are, it's a platform and that covers these city block areas from 30th to 33rd Street, from 10th to 11th, and then there's another phase that goes from 11th to 12th Avenues. But that whole platform actually supports there's 4 million square feet in two of the towers, another million in another tower, another million and a half. So it's like 7.8 million square feet altogether. And the interrelationships of everything from the structure, but also the infrastructure that you need to create a space underneath that has air and fire safety for the trains in there. All of those things together just make it very, very complex.
Right.
And structurally, we also have to consider it's because of where it is, the security issues and those things that weigh into our everyday thinking about structures today.
Right.
As a result of our issues in 9/11 in New York City.
When it comes to developing a structural system for a tall building, do you end up just arriving at something when you negotiate all of the things you just described, or do you have an idea and then you have to incorporate those concerns? How does it develop?
It's a whole process, because if we're involved early enough, which we need to be if it's a tall building, something that's 600, 700 feet, 800, 900 feet maybe, it's not such a big deal to have the architect maybe go off on their own and do a lot of the planning without us. But
and
once
then
you
come
start
to you and say,
yes,
make this stand up.
Yeah, that's still not ideal.
Right.
But once you get beyond 1,000 feet, you really, if you're going to do a building of that height, you need to make sure that you engage everybody at the same time. So it's a totally collaborative process. It's, give and take. The architects come up with their concepts of how they'd like a building to work, and the owners, obviously. Things like this particular building has a side core that goes up the first 20 floors, and then we have a center core that goes from there on. And that creates complexities from a structural standpoint, but it was an important aspect of how the building was going to function. You're going to have big, wide open floors at the base that could lease and were very popular to be leased. So it was obviously a selling point for the building. Yeah. Very important to be able to do that.
Looking back earlier in your career, what were some of the first projects that you worked on that were really instructive or informative that kind of led you to where you are today?
Well, I joke that my first building was actually, would be considered a podium today. Tall buildings were not that tall.
Right.
35 years ago. Really, they weren't. And as you know, the bar is being rising all the time. So I think it was good to grow up in the industry at that time, because I think we managed to look at the simpler forms of systems. They were very refined. You would have a core building, or you would have a perimeter building, perimeter bracing building. They were generally one thing or another, and they could be more pure. As we developed and the buildings got taller, you need to engage way more of the systems, and almost every element in a lot of these tall buildings needs to be part of the lateral system in some way, because you don't want to waste material. So you often engage, even if you have a core, you reach out and engage the perimeter, or you create super columns with exterior bracing, and you do things like that. So I would say some of the buildings, there were 4 buildings in a row, all at a very close together in the late 90s, where they were all steel frame buildings, but each one had a completely different system. One was, a core without riggers. The next, and these were all in the Times Square area of New York. The next one was a perimeter system, not the tallest building, so it could be softened a little bit. It was sort of a modified tube. Then the third one was a little taller, so it needed to have diagonal bracing, and then the fourth one actually was also, this was the New York Times building. It had a outrigger system, plus we were able to engage the exterior bracing, which was not fireproofed, for control of deflections and comfort control, not for strength. So you gradually build on the sort of the repertoire of buildings, and then of course the concrete core buildings and outriggers that go with those. So I think that I ended up being exposed in a lot of ways to a great range of buildings. And that range allowed me to explore all kinds of systems. So you'd have pretty much worked with almost every system at some stage, and then you know how to incorporate it and where it's most valuable and when it works best.
And now you say it's more common to have multiple systems in one building.
Yeah, absolutely. As you get to the 400 meters and buildings of that height, you really need to make sure that you get the whole building engaged. We talk about an aspect ratio for a core. When we had a lateral system that's a core, an aspect ratio is the height of the building over the dimension of the core. Well, if your lateral system is the full width of your building, you can get much taller with the building because the aspect ratio of your lateral system is the full width of the building. So that really, it's like that anchoring of a sail, whatever you get. That's what the outriggers are.
Yeah.
So.
Did you always want to work on tall buildings?
I grew up in Ireland. The tallest building was 17 stories when I was finishing college. I mean, that's less than 200 feet tall. So it wouldn't qualify as anything today. So I didn't always want to work on tall buildings. I was interested in structure to start with, but I soon, when I worked in London, my first job was actually working on projects in Hong Kong, residential buildings, tall residential buildings, and I got the bug. Once I came to New York, I really found that New York, it just inspired me to want to work on more and more of those buildings. And I enjoyed the collaboration with developers. I like to make the building be the best building, not necessarily the best structure. For me, that's kind of, if I can do that, I think I've done something good for the project and for the owner and hopefully for the architect too.
Yeah, that's interesting because people don't generally see the structure.
No.
Or at least they don't think they're seeing it, but I guess they are seeing the structure, right? I mean, it's inherently tied to the design of the building.
Right. Well, some things are more exposed and obvious than others, and certain architects like to expose the whole system and have it be seen, and others prefer to keep it hidden. Either way, really, it's just having the pride to feel like you're giving the building the best chance to be what the building wants to be. So that's what they ask of us, and that's the way I look at it. I want to be part of that team that creates something that's special. So if the structure isn't the special part, that's okay, as long as the building itself functions well and we get the best out of it.
You're an expert in this kind of unseen world now, I guess. To most people, it's not the first thing they notice or think about. But I imagine there's a lot of things that you see and wonder, I can't believe that's still done that way. Are there ways that structural engineering is done that you think that you're kind of surprised about?
One thing I feel with the race in the technology world and the way everything is happening, I think that the construction industry as a whole, we're a little bit behind. I think I watch people with structural steel buildings. I can't believe we've been analyzing buildings in 3 dimensions using these fabulous analysis programs and design and everything. Then we take all that information, and even if we use the model and use it in a Revit model, which is just mostly architecture and structure together integrated, but it's not something that they fabricate from generally.
Right.
So I can't believe that we take that and put 2-dimensional details on a drawing. And then we give it to the contractor and we say, hey, here you go. And he takes the drawing and he says, okay, I got to read this detail in this section of this, and I've got to make it into a 3-dimensional building. So the fact we are have been for the last 7 or 8 years developing that detailed 3D model with all of the connectivity of everything and releasing it to the steel fabricator as part of what we release. That's we call that delivering the model. When we do that, you bypass a whole phase where there can be confusion and there's more errors made because of trying to translate something back and forth. And I think that if the whole industry should be doing it this way. That's what I believe. We do it a lot. Not every client wants to do it that way. And it depends. And not every architect is ready to do it that way either. There's a perception sometimes that we take more responsibility or risk on ourselves. And I don't see it that way. I think that we control the model and control the information further down the line, it's more likely that there'll be less errors.
I see. But that would entail, I guess, getting more involved in the construction process.
Yeah, and I think that's where we need to go. We need to blur the lines a little bit more. We need that more collaborative process. I'm actually pretty surprised that the collaborative model in general hasn't succeeded to completely wipe out the confrontational model. There's still 2 models of construction out there, or of processes of running projects.
Is the confrontation model basically how it's usually done? What does that mean exactly?
It just means that as soon as you issue documents or construction documents for something to start building, because an owner might get a firm price from somebody immediately on day one, if their number isn't exactly what they thought it was, or if they're or expected it to be, then there's that sense of, who do I blame? So I need to find a way to get more money for this, so I need to say that something wasn't right. In that scenario for construction has been around forever. I think the idea of bringing teams together and making them work more collaboratively and accept that it's a team, that part it works best. It's certainly the most successful jobs I've had have been that kind of a model. And also, the projects you feel best about. You go home feeling good about it because you're working together with everybody to produce a good building.
Let me ask you that then. What is the project that you feel best about? Are you most proud of any particular work?
There's several of them actually. The Comcast Tower, the first one in Philadelphia, was a very collaborative arrangement. I did 2 projects with Boston Properties in Times Square that were collaborative also. So there have been several, and they're the ones that you kind of remember. And
you're most proud of the collaborative ones.
Yes,
is that why?
That's why.
Because of the process.
Because of the process. Because you know that it gets to the right answers as easily and as quickly as possible, and you know that essentially you'll end up with less angst on everybody's part, and everybody feels like they can get the solution that they're looking for.
architecture, tall building, all the kind of tall building trades tend to be pretty male-dominated industries.
Yes.
You're one who's achieved a huge level of success. What do you think needs to be done to make this problem a little less evident in all these industries?
It's really difficult. I came all the way through, and I think 5 or 10 years ago, I suddenly turned around, and there was nobody behind me. And I blame myself for not being more aware of that fact, because we got a large company and we've had some very strong women. We still have some very strong women behind, but there's no other woman on the board. And in the senior ranks, we're still at low numbers. We might be starting off with 70-30 at the entry level now, or maybe it's 65-35%. But then as soon as you get a little further down, the graphs, they diverge. So I think we need to work, I think as a whole industry, we should be working on the pipeline piece. They say that girls in middle school is when they get turned off STEM. There's a group called the Salvadori Center. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they develop programs for middle school kids. And I went and watched a class being taught one day, and to see, 10-year-old little girl in a pink frilly dress, jumping up and down with excitement, trying to answer a question about structures. But what happens between that stage and the 16, 17 stage when they're making a decision, oftentimes they fall by the wayside, because that's where they actually learn somehow through what they hear around them that they're not as good at math, they're not as good at these things. So that's important. But I think we first need to create role models for those young kids. So we need to make sure that we recognize young women who are doing good jobs in this field. If we see people who are excelling, we need to recognize them. And I think it would be great if CTBUH were to, encourage a diversity in the teams that they are, diversity of all kinds, but that encourage diversity of gender in the teams that they are recognizing. That wouldn't be a bad thing. It sort of sets a tone. We can't say, give an award to this person or to this team because it's a team of women. That's not going to make sense, because we want to honor the best projects and make sure that obviously excellence is what we're looking for. But I think we can find ways to encourage, and I think we should.
Let me ask you another question that's just sort of general that we've been asking a lot of people, which is, what do you think innovation in tall buildings means to you?
It's a combination of things. I think it's products, it's systems, and it's process. So I think all three of those go together. I've seen there's some very interesting products out there. I don't know that they're, maybe they're not all totally cutting edge, but we need to encourage that process, because otherwise people won't take risks. So I really like the innovation awards that are being given out, because I think it encourages that, gets people out there and helps the rest of the industry to see what people are doing.
Last question. Knowing what you know now, what would you have told your younger self starting your career?
Well, I think it's be bold is the most important thing. It took me a little while. I was really shy. And it
just
took
by
me,
nature, or in
no, I think it was just not by nature generally, but in the field, the work environment. Initially, I was very retiring and very not withdrawn, but I was shy and afraid to speak up. I would always tell people to speak up, but I would also then say to watch the people behind you. Make sure that as you make strides and you gain in seniority in your career, that you keep an eye on the women who are coming behind you and advocate for them. Women don't always advocate very well for themselves. So they say that that's an important aspect of how you get ahead. And if you don't feel like you're getting ahead, some women will lose interest and quit because they're not being recognized, or they're
Right.
so it's a very it's a delicate balance. But I think I would say keep an eye on the other women who are with you and advocate on their behalf. Be sponsors, be mentors, and do that.
Great.